Have you ever felt it? That sensation of being an exposed nerve in a world that moves too fast, a world that shouts and clatters when all your soul wants is the sacred stillness of a whisper. If you have ever felt as though you experience reality on a completely different frequency, a higher, more sensitive vibration than those around you, if you have ever absorbed the chaotic emotions of a crowded room until you felt sick, or felt the phantom sorrow of a stranger on the street as if it were your own, or gazed upon the unspeakable, explosive joy of a sunset until the beauty became a physical ache in your chest, then this message is your divine validation. You are not alone. You are not broken. You are, in fact, operating exactly as you were designed to. You are simply awake in a world that is still deep in a collective slumber, a world that has forgotten the language of the soul that you speak so fluently. For some of you who find this message, it will feel like a key turning in a lock you never knew was there, unlocking a vast, luminous part of yourself that you were taught to hide, to suppress, to believe was a flaw. If these words resonate within the deepest, most sacred chambers of your heart, let your soul's energy be known in this space. Like this message so that its frequency may travel and find others like us. Subscribe to continue this sacred journey of awakening together, and in the comments, affirm your truth by sharing the simple, powerful words, I see. This is your declaration to the universe that you acknowledge the profound reality of your own soul's journey. There exist certain souls, ancient and finely tuned, who are not merely born into this world by chance. They are sent as emissaries of a deeper reality. They arrive here as vibrational pioneers, destined to experience life without the usual filters, without the thick, protective layers of emotional and energetic insulation that shield most of humanity from the raw, unfiltered, and often unbearable intensity of existence. These souls do not simply look at the world from a safe distance. They absorb it into their very essence. They feel the pulse of the planet in their bones, the currents of collective emotion in their blood, the silent stories of the earth in the very fiber of their being. They are the energetic sponges of humanity, the empaths and the seers, unconsciously taking in the ecstatic highs of collective joy, the hollow ache of silent despair, the unspoken longings that hang in the air like ghosts, and the crushing weight of it all. This is not a choice they make. It is their divine nature, an integral part of their sacred contract with the universe. They are here to feel it all, to transmute it, and to reflect it back to a world that has forgotten how to feel. Vincent van Gogh was one of these rare, incandescent beings. His soul was not a fortress, but a vibrant, open channel, and through this sacred conduit flowed the unfiltered torrent of reality in all its chaotic glory. When he stood before a wheat field, he did not just see a picturesque landscape for a potential painting. He became one with the living, breathing entity of that field. He felt its deep, ancient sorrow as storm clouds gathered like bruises in the sky, a feeling of primal terror as the crows, like shards of darkness, took flight. He felt its radiant, almost painful beauty as the golden sun bathed it in a divine liquid light. He felt its profound and eternal longing, the desperate upward reach of every single stalk toward the infinite, unknowable sky. To a soul calibrated to such a high frequency, an object was never just an object. A simple, rough-hewn wooden chair, as seen in his paintings of his room in Arles, was not merely a place to rest a weary body. It was a vessel of profound loneliness, a silent testament to absence, echoing with the phantom weight of the person who was not there. Yet, in the same moment, it was a symbol of quiet, humble presence, of the dignity found in simplicity and solitude. A sky, for him, was never a passive canvas of blue and white. It was a swirling, tempestuous vortex of cosmic emotion, a living, breathing entity where you could witness the grand drama of existence unfold. It was a battlefield between celestial light and abyssal shadow, a tumultuous ocean of becoming where hope and despair wrestled for dominance. A tree was never just a collection of wood and leaves. It was a gnarled, reaching prayer, a silent sage whose twisted branches told the story of a lifetime of struggle and endurance. He saw its roots clinging desperately to the dark, nourishing earth, a symbol of our own primal connection to the material world, while its highest branches clawed at the heavens, representing the soul's insatiable yearning for transcendence. For a soul like Vincent's, nothing in this world was neutral, nothing was mundane. Everything, from a humble pair of worn-out boots to the face of a peasant woman etched with hardship, carried an immense, almost crushing weight of meaning. Each object, each person, each moment vibrated with a hidden story, a resonant emotion, an existential truth waiting to be perceived. His hypersensitivity, therefore, was not merely an emotional quirk or a psychological condition to be managed. It was the very lens of his perception, the high-definition operating system through which he experienced existence itself. It was a state of being so raw, so perpetually open, that it bordered on the divine and the torturous in the very same breath. He was a man who saw the intricate, hairline cracks beneath the polished surface of everyday life. He could perceive the silent screams hidden behind a polite and hollow smile, the vast, echoing loneliness that permeated a crowded, boisterous room. And in doing so, in being this wide-open vessel for the world's unexpressed truth, he was destined by his very nature to carry a weight of awareness far greater than any single soul was ever meant to bear. His paintings, therefore, could never be mere attempts to replicate a surface-level reality. How could they be? The reality he perceived was 1,000 times more vibrant, more terrifying, more electrically alive, and more heartbreakingly beautiful than what the ordinary, filtered eye could ever hope to see. His canvases were not calm depictions, they were volcanic confessions. They were the raw, desperate, and beautiful outpourings of a soul utterly overwhelmed by the sheer, magnificent force of its own perception. There is a deep, resonant tragedy inherent in the destiny of a soul who sees too much, who feels too much. The tragedy is not that their vision is flawed or distorted. On the contrary, their vision is often the most accurate. The tragedy lies in the fact that the world around them, wrapped in the comfortable blanket of its collective slumber, insists on staying blind. Our society often rewards those who skim the surface, who live in the shallow waters of accepted consensus reality, who find a million ways to numb themselves to the deeper, more turbulent currents of existence. It celebrates conformity and pathologizes those who, by their very nature, cannot conform. Van Gogh moved through this world like a ghost who hadn't yet died, a visitor from another dimension of feeling. He was physically present, a man of flesh and blood who walked the earth, but his spirit, his true, incandescent essence, was never fully received. People encountered him, but they did not truly meet him. They saw a man, often an awkward, intense, and unsettling man, but they could not perceive the swirling universe of color, light, and pain that raged within him. His attempts at connection, which sprang from a deep, soul-level yearning for communion, almost always ended in rupture, in a painful shattering against the cold, unyielding walls of misunderstanding. His friendships, offered with such passionate sincerity, were misinterpreted as invasive and overwhelming. His profound capacity for love was seen as an unstable obsession. His purest, most childlike intentions were misread as the chaotic impulses of madness. Even among his fellow artists, men who were supposedly dedicated to the craft of seeing the world anew, he was frequently dismissed as being simply too much, too intense in his gaze, too unstable in his emotions, too overwhelming in his presence. The frequency at which his soul vibrated was so high, so pure, that it created a painful dissonance with the lower, denser frequency of the world around him, leaving him in a state of perpetual, heartbreaking, and cosmically significant isolation. And yet, through all this pain, what was the core of his longing? What was the silent prayer that pulsed behind every single frenetic, impassioned brushstroke? It was something incredibly simple, profoundly beautiful, and utterly human. All he ever truly longed for was a shared humanity. He craved just a single fleeting moment of true emotional clarity between his soul and another, a sacred, non-judgmental space where the entirety of his being could finally be seen and acknowledged without the labels of fear, without the diagnosis of madness. His voluminous, soul-bearing letters to his beloved brother Theo are sacred texts that document this profound longing. They are filled not only with the deep, unwavering bond of brotherhood, but with a desperate, lifelong plea for recognition, a need not just to be seen on the surface, but to be truly, deeply, and unconditionally understood. The fact that he was able to take this crushing, soul-destroying weight of isolation, this profound spiritual solitude, and alchemize it into art of such luminous, life-affirming power is a testament to the indestructible resilience of his spirit. It is, in itself, a miracle of the human heart, a divine act of turning the lead of suffering into the purest gold of beauty. But to fully grasp his journey, we must understand this divine and difficult truth. Behind every swirling, ecstatic, starry night, behind every radiant, sun-drenched sunflower, there was a man who could not find a true home in the world he so desperately and passionately loved. He lived his entire life as someone in exile, not an exile from a specific country or a geographical place, but a far deeper exile from a shared emotional language, a vibrational resonance that almost no one around him seemed to speak or even comprehend. It was this profound, soul-deep disconnect that led the great French dramatist and visionary Antonin Artaud, another soul who intimately knew the torment of extreme sensitivity, to write his revolutionary and searing essay, Van Gogh, the man suicided by society. In that single, explosive, and unforgettable phrase, suicided by society, lies an entire universe of truth, an accusation against our collective numbness, and a lament for the seers we crucify that echoes through the corridors of time. Artaud, looking through his own lens of painful clarity, saw in Van Gogh not a madman, but a lucid visionary of the highest order. He saw a man of such rare and painful insight that his very lucidity became unbearable to a society terrified of its own reflection, a society built on the flimsy structures of denial, on the worship of surfaces, and on the comfortable, soul-anesthetizing lies we tell ourselves just to get through the day. In Artaud's powerful view, Van Gogh's profound sensitivity, a quality that should have been revered as a divine gift of insight, was instead diagnosed as a pathology, an illness to be treated and contained. His clarity was labeled as madness. He was institutionalized, ridiculed, and ultimately ignored, not because he was sick, but as Artaud so brilliantly argued, because he was too lucidly healthy for a profoundly sick world. So, let us ask the question that Artaud forces us to confront. What if his so-called madness was not a sickness at all, but a perfectly sane and logical reaction to the pervasive, underlying sickness of the world around him? What if his deep, abiding sorrow was not a sign of personal weakness, but a heightened, honest, and courageous response to an age that was fundamentally incapable of genuine tenderness and authentic connection? Artaud's argument completely reframes Van Gogh's entire story. It presents him not as a fragile man who simply fell apart under pressure, but as a profoundly strong man who was actively torn apart by a world too brutal, too superficial, to accept the sublime and challenging beauty he offered. In this profound and unsettling view, Van Gogh becomes not a cautionary tale about the dangers of mental illness, but a sacred martyr of perception. His suffering was not a self-inflicted wound born of a diseased mind. It was a wound administered by society itself, a slow, painful crucifixion of a soul that simply dared to feel everything. And still, even under this crushing, unbearable weight, despite the constant barrage of rejection and the soul-deep ache of isolation, Vincent van Gogh continued to create. He painted desperately, feverishly, as if the very act of applying paint to canvas was the only thing that could save him from drowning in the vast, indifferent sea of human unconsciousness. Each loaded brushstroke, thick with pigment and emotion, became an act of holy defiance. It was a refusal to become numb, a sacred declaration that his soul, no matter how battered, would not be silenced. His art was not just a form of expression. For him, it was survival itself. But even that divine, creative survival has its limits. We must ask ourselves, how long can a single soul act as a conduit for the emotional residue of the entire world before it begins to fray, to crack, to disintegrate under the pressure? How long can you scream in vibrant, explosive color into a vast, silent void that refuses to answer back? In the end, Van Gogh was not truly undone by his failures, nor even by the constant rejections he faced. He was undone by the silence. The deafening, soul-crushing silence of a world that looked upon his sacred art, these fragments of his very soul, and saw only the bizarre markings of madness instead of what they truly were, the desperate, beautiful transmissions of a man begging to be known. To see the world as he saw it was to be in a state of perpetual undoing, to be constantly broken open by the sheer, unmediated intensity of it all, undone by a beauty so profound it hurt, undone by a pain so deep it was universal, undone by the sheer inability to simply look away and pretend it wasn't there. And so, in the end, what truly killed him was not the world's active cruelty, but its passive, devastating indifference. A vision too wide for narrow minds, a heart too open for a closed-off world that, ultimately, is how you die from seeing too much. When Antonin Artaud wrote his famous title, he wasn't just offering a clever critique, he was issuing a thunderous indictment from one seer on behalf of another. For Artaud, Van Gogh's death was not the result of some internal, chemical imbalance, but of the slow, grinding violence of a world that cannot tolerate a soul who sees too clearly. Artaud, who had his own brutal, scarring history with psychiatric institutions, understood what it meant to have your clarity crushed and labeled as insanity. When he looked at Van Gogh's life, he recognized far more than just a tragic artist. He saw a prophet, a divine messenger whose visions were too immense, too uncontainable for a society built on the flimsy, fragile foundations of denial. Perhaps it is the gentle priest and profound spiritual thinker, Henri Nouwen, who offers us the most healing and integrated lens through which to view this sacred, painful story. In his transformative work, Nouwen speaks of a profound spiritual paradox, the archetype of the wounded healer. This is the revolutionary idea that it is precisely our brokenness, our bleeding places, the parts of us that have been most deeply shattered by the trials of life, that paradoxically give us the capacity to love most deeply, to connect most meaningfully, and to become a source of healing for others. Our wounds, when we have the courage to embrace them and offer them as a gift to the world, become sacred sources of life and compassion. When we apply this powerful framework to Vincent van Gogh, his entire story transforms into a haunting and beautiful testament to this very truth. Van Gogh was not just a man drowning in his pain. He was a man who, through the divine alchemy of his art, relentlessly tried to transform that very pain into a gift of beauty, not for his own sake, but for others. His letters to Theo, while filled with such a palpable yearning, are also overflowing with an immense, unconditional, and selfless love. He held nothing back, as if each written word, each impassioned brushstroke, could somehow build a fragile bridge over the vast chasm of his own despair and reach the heart of another. He never, ever stopped trying to reach out, even when the world offered him nothing but a cold, empty hand in return. That persistent, unwavering gesture, that relentless insistence on creating and expressing beauty right in the heart of darkness, is the unmistakable mark of a wounded healer. He was someone who, in Nouwen's sacred terms, was unconsciously ministering to the soul of the world through his own wounds. In this light, Van Gogh's paintings cease to be mere cries for help. They reveal themselves as offerings, as sacred acts of love wrapped in the vibrant flesh of color and light. He painted with a desperate, holy urgency, as though he knew on some deep, intuitive level that his time was running out, as though each finished canvas was a life raft he was building not for himself, but for someone else in a future he would never see, someone who might also be drowning in the dark waters of their own sorrow. His fields were on fire with a divine emotion, his skies twisted with an almost unbearable spiritual longing. There is something profoundly sacred in this, not religious in a dogmatic or institutional sense, but sacred in the most primal, human way. He did not retreat into the cold comforts of bitterness or nihilism. Instead, he took the full force of his torment and turned it into radiant sunflowers, into welcoming cafes glowing warmly under a starlit sky, into unflinching portraits that vibrate with the fragile, beautiful, and sacred truth of human existence. That transformation, that courageous refusal to let his immense pain rot into cynicism, is what elevates Van Gogh beyond the simple category of a tragic figure. He was a silent healer, one who tirelessly tried to give others the very things he so deeply craved but never fully received: solace, recognition, and a true sense of belonging. In this light, his entire life becomes a kind of gospel written not in words, but in oils and canvas, a sacred text that tells us, across the centuries, that even the most shattered voices can learn to sing. There is a tragic, yet breathtakingly beautiful, irony woven into the fabric of Van Gogh's life that becomes almost unbearable to contemplate the closer one looks. He was a man who gifted the world some of its most enduringly beautiful and life-affirming images, but he could not, in the end, find a lasting refuge within them for himself. His paintings are overflowing with an ecstatic energy, light, movement, wonder, and a reverence for life, yet he himself was not spared from the encroaching darkness. This profound, agonizing disconnect between the vibrant life he gave and the tormented life he lived is perhaps the most heartbreaking and instructive aspect of his entire story. It is so tempting, so comforting, to believe in the simple narrative that beauty heals, that the act of creating art can redeem the act of suffering. But Van Gogh's life stands as a stark, powerful testament that this is not always true. For him, art was not a protective shield. It was an act of total exposure. With every new painting, he peeled back another layer of his own soul, revealing his absolute rawness, his infinite longing, his bone-deep weariness for all the world to see, even if they were not yet ready to look. He wasn't hiding in his work, he was screaming through it. And the profound, echoing silence that met that scream is the very silence that eventually consumed him. What happens when you pour your entire soul, your lifeblood, into something, and the world simply shrugs in return? What happens when you offer it the entirety of your being and receive only the cold, empty void of indifference? Van Gogh's struggle was never just about money or his physical and mental health. It was a profoundly existential crisis. He did not want fame or fortune. He craved meaning. He yearned for his art to be an act of communion, a bridge between souls, not just another commodity to be bought and sold. But the world, in his lifetime, was not ready for such a raw and honest exchange. The recognition he so desperately needed to validate his very existence did not come in time. And without that resonant echo from the outside world, without another soul to look at his work and say with true understanding, "Yes, Vincent, I see what you see," even the most sublime beauty becomes a crushing burden. His colors, so electrically alive, so full of a trembling, divine emotion, ultimately became painful reminders of all that he could not grasp in his own life. A sense of belonging, a moment of true peace, a feeling of internal rest. For him, the beauty he created with his own hands was not an escape from his pain. It was a constant, searing confrontation with it. His art showed him, again and again, the divine potential of the world, and in the same moment, its stubborn, heartbreaking refusal to become it. And that agonizing contrast, that gap between the sacred vision and the profane reality, may have broken him more than solitude or poverty ever could. So what remains of Vincent van Gogh today is not just a story of madness or misery, but a powerful living mirror. It is a mirror that reflects the unbearable, beautiful light of a soul that saw too much, felt too much, and loved too deeply for the world he inhabited. He did not paint to be understood, for he knew on some level that was impossible. He painted because he could not keep the visions and feelings inside, because the churning silence within his own soul was louder and more demanding than any spoken word, and the only way to survive it, for as long as he did, was to give it form, color, and life. In his swirling skies, we see the inner turbulence of a soul that never found a moment of true rest. In his sun-scorched fields, We see a spiritual longing that never fully landed on this earth. But in all of it, we see a profound and unflinching truth, not a truth that is polished, resolved, or easy, but one that is raw, alive, and eternally luminous. Van Gogh died, yes, but in another, more essential way, he never stopped speaking. His life and his work became a question that still hangs in the air of every museum that holds his art. Can beauty alone save a soul that is breaking? Perhaps not, but perhaps, just perhaps, it can save ours. When we stand before his paintings today, we are not just admiring art. We are standing at the sacred edge of another being's inner world. We are witnessing a profound act of courage, of radical vulnerability, and of an unconditional love for life itself. And in that shared moment, there is something sacred, something eternal. Vincent van Gogh did not survive the crushing weight of his own divine light, but in a final, selfless act, he passed it on to us. And now, it is ours to carry not as a burden of sorrow, but as a luminous reminder that beauty still matters, that feeling deeply is our greatest strength, not a flaw, and that even the most wounded among us, through the alchemy of an open heart, can become a source of profound healing for all those who come after. The silence after Van Gogh is not an absence, it is an offering. Listen closely with the ear of your heart, and you will hear him still.